Hello and welcome back to my allotment here at the end of June. It's the 26th today and it's the evening. I've come here after work and I've not brought enough layers because it's actually pretty chilly. The wind's picked up and now it's getting really cold. In fact, when you look at the month of June as a whole, it's been quite a cool month. We haven't had that much sunshine, it's not been very warm and it's been very, very wet. It's almost as if this month has made up for the lack of rain over the last 6 months. It's just been torrential at times. We've had lots of flash flooding, some stormy weather, some humid days, but on the whole just generally cold and wet, quite dreary. It's been like, you know, autumn really. But at the start of the month I had a busy one. I went to RHS Chatsworth flower show where I was volunteering and had an amazing time there. It was such a great show, some really high quality show gardens this year. There was a theme of mindfulness across the show gardens and it was wonderful to meet some of the designers, and especially Emily, who's a friend of mine on Instagram, and her garden called Elements of Sheffield was absolutely stunning, and there were so many little features that I loved and I could really see the inspiration of Sheffield behind her work. I particularly love the moss wall with the water feature trickling down, the kind of hints at the Peak District, because that's on the cusp of Derbyshire and Sheffield, and it was just lovely to meet her. It was also so nice to meet so many of you guys. I was quite taken aback by how many of you came up to me and said, you know, hello, and said how much you enjoy watching my videos. It was really quite surreal, but it was very humbling and it was so nice to meet you all, so thank you for saying hello. One of my favourite highlights from the show was actually in the garden that I was stationed in as a volunteer. Every year the RHS put on their own display garden that the public can walk around and get ideas from, and this year it was all about gardening for wildlife, and I was in the garden that was designed by Sharon Hafferty, and it was first of all, it was just an absolutely stunning garden. There was a wildflower meadow, there was this beautiful pond, it had a wormery, a beehive. I got to meet her and she was just so lovely. And yeah, over the weekend I was there and just enthusing with visitors about how they can encourage more wildlife into their gardens by setting up habitats, and talked a lot about my little tiny pond. There were lots of gorgeous plants there and I took lots of ideas away from that garden in particular. There was this log that had been hollowed out in the middle because it obviously had some kind of disease, and I just loved the way that Sharon thought of using that as a bug hotel, and she used them in various different ways by putting lots of sticks and pine cones and things inside them to make a more natural looking bug house, and there were just lots of little ideas that I'm going to try and implement into my own allotment. It's getting so windy. I also went to the BBC Gardeners World Live and I helped set up the show garden for Derby College, which is where I study, but not for much longer. My course is about to end, or at least this part of it. I'm on the RHS Practical Horticulture Level 2 course and it's been absolutely brilliant, and it was so good to go there before the show and help set up this amazing show garden with some of my fellow students and my tutor, and to see all of our work come to fruition, because some of the seeds that we've been sowing this year, we've been dividing lots of plants, some of those are actually in that show garden. It included a planting arrangement in a pot that I'd actually worked on, and over 70 students worked in this garden. It was the biggest show garden there, and it had these amazing life-size driftwood horses at the entrance, and they're on their hind legs and it was just such a dramatic entrance, and yeah, it was just such a fabulous show, and I went round it when it was open to the public with my friend Maddie from the course, and we just had a really good day out doing lots of shopping and just mooching around all the stalls, talking to the nurseries, and yeah, it was just a brilliant show. I'm looking forward to it all over again next year, although I might not be involved in the show garden at Derby College. It just depends what they arrange next year and if I decide to go on another course. On the allotment this month, it feels like everything's kind of lagging behind a bit because we haven't had the sunshine. The strawberries are really late, and there's just, I don't know, not too much growth happening yet. And I was worried for a while because I've heard about this contamination in compost and manure, and it's called aminopyralid. And you may have heard Charles Dowding talk about it, and I know Tanya on Lovely Greens has recently posted a video about her tomatoes that have been affected. And ever since I heard from Charles about it, I've been really paranoid. Basically, it's when a herbicide that comes from, originally it's from farms that grow grass for hay. They spray this herbicide over it, and then eventually it passes through the horse or the cow, creates the manure that gets bagged up into some compost, and it's still got this herbicide in it, and it can affect your plants. And it's so widespread this year, and just looking on Twitter, there are so many people affected, and it can be in manure, it can be in compost. It's going to poison the soil, and it takes a long time to break down. So I've been a bit paranoid about that. I've noticed a few signs, and I suddenly jumped on it, and I was like, oh, it's aminopyralid, what am I going to do? But actually, I'll show you as we go around. Some things I think are actually aphid damage, because they have a similar kind of distorted leaf. But if you want more information, go and see Charles Dowding's video or Tanya's video, because I won't be covering it too much in this tour. But on the plus side, the dahlias are in, the chilies are in, and they're fruiting already. Lots of flowers as well. I've got some sweet peas growing marvellously. I've bought lots of new plants at the plant shows, quite a lot of which I still need to put in the ground. And I might actually harvest some garlic today if it doesn't rain or get too cold. So let's go have a look around the plot. Well, everything's growing pretty well. I still haven't actually finished sorting out the border for the flowers on the left just yet, but the rose that I recently planted is growing really well. It's a climbing rose, and it is beginning to climb. And look, I even have the first flower buds appearing. This is the generous gardener rose. It did have a bit of a problem with aphids when they boomed a few weeks ago, but you know, I'm an organic gardener, I don't spray any chemicals, and I knew that nature would take its course. And sure enough, the next week we had loads of ladybirds, and ladybird larvae were gobbling them all up. And down in the pond, well, there's a bit of a duckweed problem going on here. I need to scoop some of that out. But I do have some water lilies that are flowering. The one that's closed here on the right does actually open in the day. It just closes when it's quite dark, and because it's approaching the evening time, it's already closed up. And this was actually a cutting from my grandmother's plant, and I wouldn't really advise that people get the same pond lily if you're going to have such a small pond like mine, because as you can see, the leaves actually pop out of the pond because it's not deep enough. But you know, it flowers every year, so it can't be too unhappy. And just next to it, all the flowers that I recently planted are coming into bloom now. I've got some calendula, some salvia there at the back, and nasturtiums as well. The hosta this year is enormous. I think it's really loved all the wet weather we've had. And you know, it's pretty slug free. There's not a lot of damage at all. So, you know, I've said it before, I'm sure, but if you want to grow a good hosta, plant it next to a pond, and hopefully all those frogs will eat all the slugs. I'm not sure what's going on with my Victoria plum tree. I know it was already struggling from year to year because the previous owner of this plot absolutely hacked it back, I've been told, and it's been struggling every year. I'm not sure if it was from the drought that we had earlier on this season, but it's dropped all of the little fruits that were appearing. Oh, I can just spot one. Can you see just the end there? But all the leaves are turning yellow, and a lot of them have actually dropped off. So I don't really know what's going on here. If you're having a similar problem, I'd love to know. In my rockery raised bed, my dahlias are in. I have 6 in here, including the Cafe au lait and my favourite Wizard of Oz, Creme de Cassis. Under the plum tree, the Sweet William has appeared. And also something that I didn't actually sow. Just next to it, this achillea has appeared out of nowhere. It's a beautiful coral colour and there's quite a lot of it. I never sowed the seeds for this, so whether they've come in from a bird or I really don't know, but it's absolutely gorgeous and I'm quite glad that it's here. The garlic, well, some of them have actually flopped over now, which is a sign to me that it's ready for harvesting. Others are still quite upright. I remember I've got a few different varieties growing here. I've been quite lucky with my garlic this year. I know a lot of people have rust on their garlics, just like this one, which is in a separate patch, and it's a fungal disease and it attacks the garlic and onion and leek family, the alliums. So it's probably time I harvested these ones. I still have lots of cosmos plants in seed trays, and these ones are actually probably about 8 inches tall. It's got a flower bud on it, and I'm going to plant these, I think, where the garlic is once I harvest them out of the ground. Inside these strawberry cages, the plants are really quite far behind for this time of year. I'd expect to be picking lots of juicy red strawberries, but they are still ripening. And I think that's because we haven't had much sunshine, and a lot of these plants in the cages are actually the runners that I've saved from previous years, because I thought it was time to update the plants because they only really fruit well for about 4 or 5 years. And next to my main path I have planted lots of calendula and they're all starting to come into bloom now. Next to the strawberry patches, I've actually covered that one with some fine mesh just to stop any rodents or birds from taking the strawberries. Most of them have actually been pollinated now, so I'm not too worried about bees not being able to get in, because I know that they're fruit forming and they just need to ripen. The blackcurrant bush doesn't look happy at all anymore. I'm going to rip that out at the end of the season and replace it with a new one. Pine berries are coming on my raspberries. These are my autumn raspberries. I have some buds appearing already. The sweet peas are climbing their trellis, and the area around and behind the apple tree is really putting on some colour now. The apples are really plumping up. Outside the shed I've moved my Mashua plant over here, and this is similar to a nasturtium, but the flowers, the leaves and the tuberous sort of root is actually edible as well, and this is climbing up my little trellis and soon it will be flowering and it'll be nice orangey flowers similar to nasturtium. Over in the wildlife corner it's been changing a little as I've been pulling up some of the feverfew that kind of dominated this area, so that I had room to plant some of the new plants that I bought from the garden shows. This is Astrantia Hadspin Blood. I actually bought this at last year's Gardeners World Live. The white flower was an existing campanula, I believe, that I planted when I started the wildlife garden last year. I bought lots of salvias at the show because they're really good for the wildlife, and this one is called Love and Wishes, and I really love the burgundy colour of the flowers, and this is even the empty casing after the flowers have dropped, and it still looks great contrasted against the green. The bird bath that I've had for a few years, but actually it did have a leak, so it doesn't hold a lot of water. I tried fixing it, but it didn't work. I've used various different sealants and it's just too far gone. So I bought a range of little alpine plants at the shows, so I'm going to make it into a little planter. The blue geraniums are coming into bloom. Been harvesting a few sweet peas. They're just coming into bloom now. And you must always remember to pick them, otherwise they'll stop producing flowers and go to seed. So I'll take this before I go today. Another new salvia, this one is called Icing Sugar. And I've got some lupins and more salvia there at the back. That purple one was from Chatsworth last year. And the really hot pink campion is now in bloom. This is great because it self-seeds and it flowers for months on end, and it's got a really nice silvery foliage as well. And here's the view of the allotment from the shed. As you can see, I've put some mesh over the carrot bed now, and that's to help prevent carrot fly that would otherwise fly into the bed and lay its eggs, and that would then destroy my crop of carrots. I have more calendula planted around it and they're coming into bloom now. I just pegged the mesh on, by the way. I didn't do any sort of fancy technique here. And as you can see, the seedlings are just popping up now. Among some of the new plants, I have this clematis. I also have this pelargonium, and I recently planted up this planter with another pelargonium, some daisies, and also some petunias. As we go into the back corner, I've bought a new heuchera because I felt that the one I had originally in this corner was too orange and it didn't match the pink theme. So this is actually a new heuchera that was developed last year, and it's called Wild Rose. And I bought it because I really wanted it to match the pink of this and also the pinkish stem on the eucalyptus. And I just love the contrast between the Starry Night, petunia and the heuchera. I'm quite into my planters this year. It's quite fun just to experiment and play with different planting schemes. Fatsu japonica is looking really lush. Over there I have a dahlia. I got a couple of the dahlias that were from the RHS Chatsworth flower show, and these were as part of the display this year, and I got to keep a couple as I volunteered. The first rose that I bought was this Chandos Beauty, and I got it from Gardeners World Live last year. It's come into bloom and it's stunning, and the smell is incredible. I finally got all the dahlias planted up in this border. I don't know what it is, but my courgettes seem really far behind this year. Looks like I've got the first one coming, but the leaves, you know, I thought they'd be so much taller and more of them by now. The lettuce have absolutely loved all the wet weather that we've had. This is the fat lazy blonde, and it's enormous. I mean, I could harvest the whole head of that now, but I've just been picking a few of the outer leaves so that it just continues to grow. And with the wet weather comes the slugs, and they've had a feast on some of my beans. I do also have some beetroot in this bed and some chard that's gone to seed, and some mustard. I've got some room left to plant some more beetroot seeds in the next few days. Over in the bed next door, the leeks that are multi-sown, so there's a couple in there together, they're growing pretty well. But this big patch in the middle is where the pickling onions and the shallots that I grew from seed are. There are a few there, but yeah, I'm not quite sure what happened to them. So I've sown some parsnip seeds in this patch. A bit late, but they should still grow. Whereas the red sun shallots that I grew from sets have actually done pretty well, and these are about ready for harvesting. Next to the potatoes, I've put some celeriac in the ground. This is a crop I've not actually grown before, so I'm looking forward to trying it. Hopefully I'll get a good harvest. And you can see the jungle of potato foliage here behind me. They are flowering at the moment, so they should be about ready to harvest soon. And the first ones that I'm going to pick are the Charlotte potatoes, because they're my absolute favourite. You can see the flowers are just coming out now, and you can start picking them after the flowers have gone over. Some people tend to wait, until the foliage has also gone yellow. But to be honest, I could probably pick some now, and they might be a bit small, but they're probably ready. I'll probably just give it another couple of weeks. My squash plants are beginning to trail, and look, this one actually has the first flower and fruit. Hopefully that's about to set. Hopefully it gets pollinated. I've actually planted my sweet corn with the squash, a bit like the Three Sisters gardening technique, where you plant squash, corn, and then the idea is you also grow a bean which will grow up the corn. But I'm not doing the beans here, so I'm just growing squash and sweet corn together, and hopefully this will grow okay, considering I left it really late until I transplanted them from the seed trays. Apparently they don't like root damage, so we'll just see how well they grow. So if you can see in this bed, I actually have 5 squash plants and a block of the sweet corn, so that helps them pollinate in the wind. And heading inside the polytunnel, and if you saw my last video you'll know that they're all strung up now, all the tomatoes are in and they're growing pretty well. So they're up to about 2 or 3 feet high. I've got lots of flowers on them already. This is the sun gold, but can you see that leaf curling? That's the sort of thing that got me worried about this aminopyralid. And I don't know, I don't think I'm out of the dark yet. I'm just going to have to wait and see how they do. But on this particular plant, I mean, I've already got lots of fruits. I think this might be the tumbler. Yeah, the tumbling tomato. Oh wow, I've also just noticed that the banana legs that I planted in my last video has actually got fruit on as well. And these will make a nice long sort of yellow tomato. And it's a heritage variety, this one. Lots of fruit on it. And a little tip for you, by the way, if you want to ensure you definitely get all of your flowers pollinated, you want to give the plant a shake. Because these flowers actually contain both male and female parts, they can be self-pollinated. You just need to make sure that the pollen gets onto the stigma, the male part, by giving it a good shake. And all of those flowers that are open should now develop a tomato. I have a new favourite plant, guys. It's not edible, but it does eat things. I picked it up at the RHS Chatsworth flower show, and I've seen them every year and I've always been tempted, but I didn't really know too much about them. But I got speaking to the nursery, who are called wax wicked plants, and this is a carnivorous plant. It's a Saransia, I think I'm pronouncing that right, and it eats flies, and it's called Judith. And I've just become so fascinated by this plant. I mean, it's beautiful for one thing. I didn't realise how easily they can grow in the UK. They actually need a cold snap over the winter because they are from the North Americas originally. And if you look closely, can you see all those tiny hairs? That encourages the flies to go down and into the trap, but they can't climb back up them. And this is how it gets its nutrients. And I did see one the other day actually. It was quite fascinating to watch. But yes, there are a couple of dead flies down the bottom of the pictures. I haven't noticed any sort of bees or anything getting trapped yet. That was a little worry of mine, but so far only flies, really tiny little sort of fungus gnat sized flies. Yeah, this is just my new favourite plant at the minute because it's just so unusual. Also in the polytunnel I have a few of my chilli plants. Most of them are in Zoran's plot though, so we'll nip over there in a moment. But if you look at this leaf, can you see how distorted it is? This is what really got me panicking about the aminopyralid, because it distorts leaves, it makes them curl inwards and they look really, really sad. But actually I think this is the damage done by aphids. And I have seen a few on the plants that I've just sort of squished as I wipe them off. But the plant generally seems quite happy. Looks like it's about to put on some flowers there as well. So I think I'm okay, but I'm not out of the woods yet. Like I said, we'll see how it goes. Just remember to keep on pulling out those suckers if you find them in between the main stem and a leaf. This little sucker will zap all the energy when I want it to grow vertically and to set lots of fruit. Look how strangely distorted this leaf is. But I think this is probably the Amish paste variety, and I know that I get some leaf distortion on them because I save the seeds every year, and I think it could have been an F1 hybrid from the beginning, so it's just a bit of a weird one to grow this one. So as I always do every month, here is how the plot is looking at the end of June on this quite cold and windy evening. Really hope the weather warms up soon so that the plants can put on some more growth and my dahlias can come into bloom. Before I go, I'm going to nip over to Zoran's allotment. That's my neighbour who I share some space with. We're going to have a look in his greenhouse because I've done a lot of planting up and there are a lot of things growing in there. As you can see, it's all planted up in here now. Got lots of tomatoes there along the right hand side. Got some cucumbers as well. There's a really fantastic grapevine that Zoran has existing in here. Got some melons, sweet potato, these are all chilies, and then my chickpeas. Turning around, I have a lot more chilies. I've gone a bit chili crazy this year and they're all beginning to flower. That's a purple cayenne pepper. This is a romanto sweet pepper. There's some purple sprouting broccoli that's ready to go out into my allotment after I've harvested some crops. And this is a Cape gooseberry, something I've not grown before. Wow, the leaves, they're actually really furry, I didn't realise. So I'm looking forward to trying some of these. And this is a variegated chilli that I got from one of the garden shows. This was from Robinson's Seeds and Plants, and I just think it's absolutely gorgeous. Here's the label, chili pepper tricolour variegata, unusual variegated foliage, small purple fruit, very hot, goes from green to red. As well as this one from Newlands, chili Bulgarian carrot. So it's going to grow lots of carrot looking chilies. So obviously look, that one's got one already. Starts green and it will ripen to orange. The melon plants are beginning to flower. This is a male flower though, not a female, because there's no little baby melon at the base of this flower. But the grapevine on here is absolutely smothered in fruit. I mean, look at that. And the chickpeas are a bit of an experiment this year. It's just something new to try. But they've got a lovely little flower on them. And I do quite like their foliage as well. Just quite a nice plant to grow. Here's one of these squash plants that is still in a container, and I didn't plant it out because I thought it had this poisoning. Because if you look at the leaves, let me find one. Just look how crinkly and deformed it is. I mean, there's nothing normal about that. But it's still growing really well. In fact, it's probably growing better than some that I've actually planted out. Probably because it's quite warm in here. But look, it's got a tiny little fruit on it already. So maybe I was wrong to be worried. It could have just been aphid damage. I always check the back of the leaves now for any aphids. This one seems to be okay now. But yeah, it's just really strange year. I think it's safe to plant this one out now. Thank you for joining me on another tour of my allotment. I really hope that the weather warms up soon. In fact, we are actually forecast for a heat wave over the next few days, which should see us into July. Hopefully it'll stick around and we'll actually have some summer weather this year. I'd love to hear from you. How are your crops growing so far this year? Have you harvested your garlic, any strawberries, or maybe you've got the aminopyralid? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. That's all for now. Thank you for joining me and I'll see you next time.